You know, one of the things that the early Christians were accused of during the time of persecution in the first century was cannibalism. And it was precisely for this reason that St. Justin the Martyr felt the need to write apologetical treatises in defense of his fellow Christians. He was trying to explain to the Roman authorities what the members of this young sectarian movement were doing when they celebrated what they called the Eucharist. I was just reading about this in the Office of the Readings a few days ago. You see, because the authorities were after them, the early Christians tended to be very secretive about their activities. They even used the fish as password in order to be able to identify each other as fellow Christians. The word for fish in Greek is ichthus. And you know, the early Christians used the word ichthus as an acronym for their confession of faith. Jesu Christu Theu Huios Soter, meaning Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. So the fish was a symbol. And they even wrote the symbol of the fish on their tombs, on their doors, on their sacred vessels, or even as a mosaic pattern on the floors of their places of worship. Can you imagine greeting someone in Greek, Irene, which is peace, and the person replies to you and says, Ichthus Irene? It will be easier to say it in English. Maybe in English, instead of saying, peace be with you, we should say, fish be with you. If the other person is not a Christian, of course he would be clueless and he would not know how to answer if he doesn't know what ichthus is supposed to mean as an acronym. But if he returns it and says, ichthus Irene, yes, fish, and peace be with you, it means you have just found a fellow disciple. In Rome, they celebrated their Eucharists in the catacombs, using the tombs as altar tables. You know, some liturgists say, this must be the background to the ancient practice of putting a relic of a saint under an altar stone which the celebrant kisses at the beginning and at the end of the Eucharist. Sometimes some people ask us, why do you kiss the altar? All of these underground practices of the early Christians added to the intrigues about their supposed practice of eating human flesh and blood. Cannibals. How would they explain it if they were even caught reading the Bread of Life discourse in the Gospel of John, like in our Gospel this evening, where Jesus says, well, for my flesh is true food. In another part, he even says, my blood is true drink. And anyone who eats my flesh and drinks my blood will live forever. How do you think people would take that? I suppose that even for the newly recruited members of the Christian community, the significance of the Eucharist was not easy to explain. In our first reading, we have an apostle who is trying to make an effort to explain the faith to an Ethiopian court official. The story is a little bit like the story of that stranger who walked with the two disciples on the way to Emmaus. The apostle is Philip. He walks with them and he breaks the ice because he hears the eunuch the Ethiopian official reading from the book of the prophet Isaiah. It is from chapter 53. It's called the suffering servant of God. Philip the apostle breaks the ice and he asks, "Do you understand what you're reading?" And the Ethiopian official says, "How can I, unless someone explains it to me?" Well, how do you expect people to understand that our Eucharist is not a ritual of cannibalism if we do not explain it to them? I found myself in a similar situation one time when I was asked to preside at the first communion celebration of elementary kids. At sa dinami-dami ng pwedeng basahin, of all things that could be read, the gospel that the deacon read was precisely that part in the Bread of Life discourse in John, where Jesus speaks about giving his flesh as food and his blood as drink. How do you expect kids to understand that? It was even said very, very poignantly in Tagalog, "Ang aking laman ipapakain ko sa inyo, ang aking dugo ay ipapainom ko sa inyo." I mean, baka magka-nightmare yung mga bata. So how did I explain it? Well, here is how I did it. I started by addressing the mothers first. I asked the mothers. I said, "O mga nanay dito, mothers, have you ever experienced making an effort to prepare food for your children, and then when it is time to eat already, they come to the table, and they look at the food and say in disgust, 'Ew, what is that?'" Usually, most mothers, when I say that to them, the mothers say, "Oh, yes. Sometimes our kids behave that way." And the kids blush in embarrassment. And then I proceed to tell them that the Israelite people behaved in the same way when they were already sick and tired of eating nothing in the desert but manna. Manna. Alam nyo ba what manna literally means in Hebrew? Manna, from the Greek word manhu, meaning what is it? But to get the sense of it, you have to say it with a tone of disgust, similar to the Tagalog expression, "Ano ba yan?" That's what whimsical kids say when they don't like the food before them and look for something else, not realizing that they are hurting their mother's feelings. In the book of Numbers, we are told that when the Israelites were already sick of eating manna, they started to whine and complain and long for the flesh pots of Egypt, wishing that they had remained the slaves in Egypt. At least now they would be better off because they would at least have meat in Egypt, rather than this disgusting and tasteless manna. That is how they referred to the food given by God to them, disgusting and tasteless. In that passage, God is like a mother who feels hurt by her children's remarks. Now, back to the first communion. After addressing the mothers, I addressed the kids. And I said, "Kids, when you are young, you have no idea what your parents have to go through in order to be able to feed you. You might think that the money that they spend just drops from heaven and that that they can buy anything that you ask of them. When you grow older, and then begin to have your own children, it is then that you will discover how difficult life is. It is then that you will know how hard you have to work, that you have to sweat it out before you can earn some money and be able to buy some food and prepare it and serve it at table. And how painful it is for a mother when the fruit of her sacrifice is regarded with disgust. Ano ba yan? Then you will understand that what they serve you isn't just food. It is their blood, sweat, and tears. By then, I usually notice the mothers wiping their tears and looking at their children with a loving smile, and the children bowing down with shame. My dear brothers and sisters, I do not mean to treat you like kids, but I hope this little explanation makes you understand what Jesus means when he says, "Take and eat. This is my body. Take and drink. This is my blood." What he is telling you really is, I'll give my life for you. If I must suffer and die all over again, I would gladly do it for love of you.